Some people judge based on appearances, but what happens when the person they underestimate holds all the power? The moment of truth is coming, and it's going to leave everyone speechless. Let us know in the comments. Have you ever been in a situation where someone completely misjudged you? Ava Johnson walked through the gleaming glass doors of the Belmont, an exclusive luxury condominium in the heart of the city. She wasn't here to sightsee. She had business to attend to, dressed in a sleek black blazer, fitted trousers and heels that echoed against the marble floor. She exuded confidence. She carried herself with the quiet assurance of a woman who had worked twice as hard to get half as much recognition. But the moment she stepped inside, she felt it. The shift in the air, the way eyes flicked toward her, scanning her up and down, as if deciding where she fit in, or rather if she fit in at all. Behind the front desk stood a young woman with a stiff posture and a name tag that read Rebecca in gold lettering. Her brows furrowed. The second she locked eyes with Ava next to her, a taller man dressed in a navy blue suit that was just slightly too tight, stood with his arms crossed. His name tag read Timothy. Both of them watched her approach with something between suspicion and condescension. Ava reached the counter and placed her designer handbag on the pristine white marble good afternoon. "I'm here for a meeting." Rebecca's smile was tight. "Practiced. Are you lost?" Ava arched an eyebrow. "I don't believe so." Rebecca's eyes darted toward Timothy before returning to Ava. "This is a private residence, I'm aware," Ava replied evenly. Timothy cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Ma'am, residents and their guests are the only ones allowed." Beyond this point, Ava studied him, noting the way his fingers curled slightly, as if he were preparing for a confrontation. She'd seen that look before, the barely concealed assumption that she didn't belong here, that she must be someone's assistant, a delivery person, or worse, someone looking for trouble. She maintained her composure. "I have an appointment." Rebecca forced another stiff smile, with whom Ava reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone. "Would you like me to call him?" Rebecca hesitated. She wasn't expecting pushback. "That won't be necessary," she said quickly. "We just need to verify Timothy." Clearly emboldened by the exchange, stepped in. "Look, we're just following policy. We have to make sure that guests are properly vetted." Ava's jaw clenched. She took a slow breath before speaking again. "So, if I were a different kind of guest, you wouldn't be asking all these questions." Rebecca's mouth opened slightly before she caught herself. It's standard procedure. Ava wasn't naive. She knew what this was. She had encountered this kind of behavior her entire life, gatekeeping disguised as policy bias wrapped in the thin veil of protocol. Timothy gave a forced chuckle. "If you have a meeting here, I'm sure whoever you're meeting can come down and confirm." Ava tilted her head. So let me get this straight. A grown woman in business attire, carrying a designer bag, standing in one of the most expensive buildings in the city, still need to prove that I'm allowed to be here." Timothy's smirk faltered for just a second. "We don't make the rules." Rebecca interjected. Ava tapped a perfectly manicured nail against her phone screen. "I assume every guest gets this level of scrutiny." Timothy folded his arms. "We're just doing our job." "Your job." Ava repeated, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. "Tell me if I looked a little different, dressed like I just came from a golf course, or wore a name you were more comfortable with, would we even be having this conversation?" Rebecca's face twitched, but she didn't answer. Timothy let out a small scoff and looked toward the security officer standing near the entrance. A silent exchange passed between them. Ava didn't miss it. They were getting ready to escalate. I suggest you call the person I'm here to meet," Ava said smoothly. "Unless, of course, you'd rather be the ones explaining why you denied access to one of his most important business partners." Rebecca hesitated. Timothy, however, wasn't ready to back down. "If you don't have the proper clearance, then I'm afraid we'll have to ask you to leave." Ava didn't flinch. She merely sighed, her patience thinning very well, she said, slipping her phone back into her bag. I wouldn't want to make a scene. Timothy smirked. Victorious, he stepped back as if he had won some unspoken battle. Rebecca's shoulders relaxed, though there was still a trace of unease in her eyes. But just as Ava turned, she heard the familiar chime of the elevator. The polished doors slid open. A tall, older man stepped out, his sharp navy suit, immaculate, his posture effortlessly commanding. He moved with the air of someone who didn't ask for permission because he never needed to. The room seemed to shift. The employees at the desk stiffened. The security guard near the door straightened his back. Ava turned back to face the two front desk attendants, watching their expressions carefully. Timothy's smirk evaporated. Rebecca's eyes widened slightly. The man's gaze swept the lobby before landing on Ava, and then his expression softened. Ava. His voice was warm, familiar. He walked straight toward her, completely ignoring the now visibly anxious front desk staff. Ava gave a slow, knowing smile. Hello, Mr. Calloway. Timothy's face went pale. Rebecca's lips parted in shock. Ava glanced between the two of them, her eyes gleaming with quiet amusement. Mr. Calloway, the owner of the Belmont, turned toward the stunned employees. I assumed there. While she was waiting, Rebecca's mouth opened, then closed. Timothy swallowed hard, suddenly looking very, very small. Ava said nothing. She didn't need to. She could feel the weight of their realization pressing down on them. And as Mr. Calloway motioned for her to follow him toward the private elevators, she did so with an effortless grace, leaving behind the two employees who had so confidently dismissed her only moments ago, and in that silence, she could almost hear their thoughts racing. How had they gotten this so very, very wrong? Timothy and Rebecca exchanged frantic glances as Mr. Calloway and Ava disappeared into the private elevator the moment the doors slid shut. Rebecca exhaled sharply, her composure crumbling. Oh my God. She whispered, her voice barely audible. Timothy, who had stood so confidently just moments ago, now gripped the desk with white knuckles. That was Calloway the Calloway. Rebecca nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. Timothy's breath came in shallow, uneven bursts, and she knew him personally. Did you see the way he greeted her? Rebecca swallowed hard. She had seen it. She had felt it. The casual familiarity. The warmth. The effortless way Ava had stepped into a world they had tried to keep her out of, and now they were trapped in the fallout of their own arrogance. Behind them, the security officer who had been watching the whole exchange took a cautious step forward. You two really messed up, he muttered, shaking his head. Timothy shot him a glare, but there was no fire behind it, just a growing sense of dread upstairs. The elevator doors opened into a penthouse suite that overlooked the entire city floor. To-ceiling windows bathed the room in golden light, the late afternoon sun casting long, elegant shadows across the polished marble floors. Ava stepped inside with practiced ease, as if she belonged here because she did. Mr. Calloway gestured toward the sleek leather seating area. Please sit, she did. Crossing her legs and setting her bag beside her, Mr. Calloway poured himself a drink from the crystal decanter on the bar. Would you like anything? I'm fine, she replied smoothly. He nodded, then took a seat across from her glass. In hand, he studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. I'm assuming my staff didn't give you the warmest welcome. Ava tilted her head, a slow smile spreading across her lips. Let's just say they were protective of the building. Mr. Calloway chuckled. Protective or prejudiced? Ava leaned back slightly, her eyes holding his. I'll let you decide. He sighed, rubbing his temple. This isn't the first time something like this has happened, but I was hoping we'd move past this kind of nonsense. Ava arched a brow. People like Timothy and Rebecca don't move past it unless they're forced to. A heavy silence settled between them. Calloway knew she was right. It wasn't about policy. It never had been. It was about perception bias. The quiet ways people like Ava were made to feel like outsiders in spaces they should have always belonged to. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. What do you propose we do about it? Ava didn't hesitate. We hold them accountable publicly. Calloway smirked straight to the fire. Huh. I don't believe in quiet consequences. Ava said, her voice even not when the humiliation was so loud. Calloway nodded, his respect for her growing. All right, let's make sure they learn their lesson. Meanwhile, back in the lobby, Timothy was pacing. His mind raced through worst-case scenarios. Would they be fired? Blacklisted? Rebecca sat frozen, her fingers trembling slightly as she tapped at her keyboard, pretending to work. They didn't have to wait long. The elevator doors slid open again, and Mr. Calloway stepped out. Ava walked beside him, calm and composed, but with a quiet edge of satisfaction in her expression. The entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. Calloway didn't waste time. He stopped directly in front of the desk, folding his arms, so he said, his tone deceptively casual. You two want to explain why my business partner was treated like an intruder in her own building? Rebecca's mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. Timothy, for once, was at a loss. Sir, we were just following protocol. Calloway's laugh was sharp and humorless. Protocol, is that what we're calling racism? Now Rebecca flinched. Timothy's face went a deep shade of red. It wasn't like that. That it was exactly like that. Calloway snapped. And the only reason you're scrambling now is because you didn't realize who she was. Ava watched them silent. She didn't need to say a word. The weight of their realization was punishment enough. Calloway leaned in slightly, his voice dangerously soft. If I can't trust you to treat all my guests and business partners with respect, then I can't trust you to work here. Timothy swallowed. Are you saying we're fired? Calloway tilted his head. I'm saying, you're done here. You can clear out your things by the end of the day. Rebecca made a strangled sound, like she wanted to protest, but knew it wouldn't help. Timothy clenched his jaw, his hands curling into fists at his sides, but there was nothing he could say, no excuse that would undo what had already been done, and as Calloway turned to walk away, Ava met their eyes, one last time, her gaze unwavering. Then, without another word, she followed Calloway back into the elevator. The elevator ride back up to the penthouse was silent, not uncomfortable, but thick with meaning. Calloway finally exhaled, shaking his head. Well, that was satisfying. Ava let out a soft chuckle. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't. He turned to face her, setting his drink down. You didn't have to go through all that, she lifted a brow, didn't I? Calloway sighed. I mean, you could have just called me the second they started their nonsense. Ava smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. And then what I get in because I have the right connections, that doesn't fix the real problem. Calloway studied her for a moment, then nodded. Fair point. She leaned back against the arm of the couch, stretching her legs slightly. You built this place. Calloway, your name is on it. If your own people don't believe someone like me belongs here, what does that say about what you've built? He winced. It says, I have more work to do. Ava's expression softened slightly. We all do. There was a long pause before Calloway smirked. I suppose now would be a bad time to ask if you're still interested in that business deal. Ava laughed, shaking her head. You know me. I don't let a little nonsense ruin good business. He raised his glass to making sure this never happens again. She clinked her non-existent drink against his to accountability. Meanwhile, downstairs, the lobby felt different. Colder, empty. Timothy and Rebecca packed up their belongings in silence. No one spoke to them. No one offered sympathy, because deep down, they all knew they had done this to themselves. The next morning, AA stood in front of her bathroom mirror, carefully fastening the diamond studs in her ears. She had a full schedule ahead, meetings, negotiations, and a long, overdue coffee with an old friend. But today felt different, not because of what had happened at the Belmont, but because of what had changed in the wake of it. Her phone buzzed a text from Calloway. Lunch at 1. Let's discuss next steps. Next steps, she exhaled, shaking her head with a small smirk. Calloway had made good on his word. Overnight, the building's management sent out a formal announcement about new sensitivity, training diversity initiatives, and the hiring of a new front desk team. But for Ava, this wasn't about fixing 2 employees, it was about fixing a system. She grabbed her purse and headed out, sliding into the back seat of her driver's black SUV. "Good morning, Miss Johnson." The driver greeted Morning Malik, she said with a smile. "Straight to the office, please." The city passed by in a blur of towering glass buildings and honking horns. It was a world she had learned to navigate with precision, a place where power wasn't always granted to people like her, but where she had carved out her own anyway. When she stepped into the lobby of her office building, her assistant Leah was already waiting with a tablet in hand. "Good morning, Ava," Leah greeted, walking beside her as they made their way to the elevators. "So I got a call from the Belmont's PR team this morning. They want to formally apologize to you." Ava stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for her floor. "Let them squirm a little longer," she said casually. Leah grinned, noted Ava leaned against the elevator wall. What else, their inboxes packed a lot of support after what happened. Apparently someone recorded the interaction at the front desk. Ava raised an eyebrow and Leah turned her tablet around, playing a video. It was grainy, likely from a cell phone, but clear enough to show Timothy and Rebecca turning her away, while Calloway's arrival changed everything. The headline underneath read, "Luxury Condo. Staff humiliates black businesswoman, instantly regret it when owner arrives." Ava rolled her eyes. Dramatic. Leah smirked. You know, the internet loves a good instant karma moment. The elevator doors opened to Ava's sleek office suite where her team was already hard at work. She strode, placing her bag on her desk, and turned to Leah. "Draft a statement," Ava said. "Make it clear this isn't just about me. It's about every person who has been dismissed, disrespected, or underestimated because they didn't look the part." Leah nodded, typing rapidly. "Got it." Aaliyah, yes. Ava met her eyes. "Make sure they know this is just the beginning." Later that afternoon, Ava walked into the high-end restaurant where she was meeting Calloway. He was already seated, scanning through a menu, but the second he saw her, he stood up. "You made it," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "I don't cancel on business," Ava said smoothly, setting her purse down. Calloway smirked. "I meant lunch," but noted the waiter arrived, taking their orders, and once they were alone again, Calloway leaned forward. "So what's the plan?" Ava took a sip of her water, considering him. "This isn't just about bad employees. It's about the culture. The assumption that some like me walking into your building must be an outsider." Calloway exhaled. "I won't argue with you there." Ava met his gaze. "Then, don't just fix the Belmont fix. The industry, start with hiring, training, accountability, make it a place where no one questions whether they belong." Calloway chuckled. "You always think big, don't you?" Ava tilted her head. "Is there any other way to think?" He grinned, lifting his glass to change. She clinked hers against his. To Justice later that evening, as Ava stepped out of her car in front of her townhouse, she saw a familiar face sitting on the stoop. Timothy. She paused, studying him. He looked different. Not the smug, overconfident man from the day before. He looked tired. She sighed. Crossing her arms, "What are you doing here?" Timothy stood, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I wanted to apologize in person." Ava stared at him, expression unreadable. "I was wrong," he admitted. I never thought of myself as racist, but that doesn't change what I did. I treated you like you didn't belong, and it wasn't just you. Was it, Ava? Let the silence stretch between them before answering. "No, it wasn't." Timothy swallowed. "I lost my job, and honestly, I deserved it. But I just wanted to say, I get it now, or at least I'm trying to." Ava studied him for a long moment. Then, with a small nod, she said, "Good." Timothy nodded back, then hesitated. "You probably don't care, but I'm looking into working with some community outreach programs to actually do something about what I didn't see before. Ava's lips curved in a smile. That's a start. Timothy took a step back. I won't take up any more of your time, just thank you for listening. Ava watched him walk away, then turned and unlocked her door. She stepped inside, kicking off her heels, and let out a slow breath change. Didn't happen overnight. But today was a step in the right direction.